Hey guys, this is my first video of 2025. It's January 11th. It's evening time, it's dark out, and I haven't made videos for a while. I've been pretty well immersed in a class I teach from which videos are made, so I could say I have been making more videos than ever, but these are of me showing my screen as I go through some data science curriculum, and there's a lot to data science, and I'm just kind of around the edges talking about the actual hands-on tools that we can use. And the students are on their way to machine learning, but by way of Python, where I come in as their first Python instructor, and then we move on into pandas. And if you're in this field, you know what I'm talking about, the data frame, and I'll come back to the data frame. But it's the Bayesian aspect of it. You know, the Cryptonomicon, a book by Neil Stephenson, if you recall that one, when that came out, if you've heard of it, it's before the Baroque cycle that he wrote. It's historical fiction, right? But it brought us back to World War II, and it told some stories that were only even just lately emerging regarding cryptography, the Enigma machines, the breaking of the German Nazi codes in Bletchley Park, Alan Turing. That whole story, all of that, that comes up again in connection with the theory that would not die, isn't that what it's called? A book about Bayesian statistics and how those have become useful and in machine learning as well because of the iterative nature and because of Markov chains and all of these things, which I do not claim to be super expert in, but I find a sort of Grand Central Station around in the School of Active Inference, which is not it's a school of thought. It's not an academic institution per se, although there is an Active Inference Institute. And I follow their meetings and minutes and stuff. So that's based in UC Davis and other places, right? It's a whole subculture, active inference. And in kind of a playful spirit, based on my last meetup of the knowledge engineering group, where Andreas joined us this time, I've thrown together a page where I'm using Zoltar here as kind of my homunculus, sort of my observer, my dude. He's like the generic, he does act, right? He's in a bubble, so that's his model of the world. And he's actively working on it at all times, trying to see if the world can be made to fit his model. It's active in that sense. But he can't do much. Zoltar is just his head in a bubble, battery powered, and he can only say a few things. And that keeps our model through Zoltar very simple, given how how restrained he is in his actions. But that's sort of a place where I also moor a lot of the synergetics that I do. And if you watch this channel, if you know about this channel, you already know about synergetics, but let me explain to anyone new. There's always newcomers. The synergetics I'm talking about is the magnum opus, the life work of a certain architect, not Le Corbusier, who did a phi-based kind of rectangular thing, but Bucky Fuller, who went into volume with his modules, the so-called beast modules, A, B, ET, and S. These are tetrahedral wedges that have certain specific dimensions, and they make a nice geometry. So if you don't know about the beast modules, then wait till you hear about the basket modules. Just kidding. Beast plus K, adding K. K for Koski, really. It's in thanks to what he's done and how we've added another rhombic tricontohedron to the concentric hierarchy. There are a lot of them, right? I mean, once you've introduced, okay, what is synergetics? Let me back up a bit. I'm getting ahead of my story. but it's centered around what we call the concentric hierarchy, which I also call matryoshka, if I got the pronunciation right, like Russian dolls. It's polyhedron within polyhedron. It's kind of like successively nested. That's why it's called a hierarchy in the sense of nesting, one inside another. And it starts with two crisscrossed tetrahedrons at the center. Whether they're both there at the same time or whatever, we can talk about different models we can make from them. But they define together the vertices of a cube, and then its dual, an octahedron. If its edges cross, form an octahedron, we get this succession of polyhedra that we can build in a logical manner. And what Fuller, the architect I'm talking about, Buckminster Fuller, provides for them is a table of volumes, relative volumes, starting with the tetrahedron as 1. And the cube in which it inscribes as face diagonals becomes therefore 3. And the octahedron, the dual to that cube, but the one that has edges same length as the tetrahedrons, has volume 4. Rhombic dodecahedron, which encases every ball in a sphere packing lattice called the CCP, has volume 6. That's the rhombic dodecahedron, and so on. Not to recap all of Synergetics here, just that in doing this, I've been finding ways to go back to my data science teaching and use a lot of the same tools. I've got 2 new Jupyter notebooks that I've been working on. One's called tabulation, and the other one's called calibration. And in the tabulation one, I'm working with this data frame that we get in pandas, which lets you do row column spreadsheet looking things, and I populate it with these polyhedrons I've just been talking about, along with the coordinates of the vertices of these polyhedrons. And I introduce another coordinate system, not anyone well known. It's in Wikipedia under quadre coordinates, and I show its coordinates alongside the XYZ coordinates for these various polyhedra. And for this, I need a table structure, and I even need multi-level indexes, which is something Pandas actually provides and that I actually teach about in my data science class. Again, I'm just working more with the tools than with the high-level theories. I'm not the one doing the machine learning, and I talk about Bayesian and frequentist statistics, but I don't. More for historical context and background, not because I'm front and center even going through Bayes' theorem in this class. It's not a theoretical class. It's a hands-on, use the tools class around the pandas data frame. So I've got a volumes table, and in calibration, what I'm doing is working harder to make sure this quadres stuff is working and making sense in terms of the code base I provide. I've got a lot of unit tests in tetravolume.py. I recreate the polyhedrons in quadres, and then I can convert them back and forth to regular XYZ coordinates, which I need to do if I want to get any kind of ray tracing out the back end. If I want to actually visualize all these things, I have to translate them out to XYZ, and that's when the rendering engine can actually understand what I want, because it doesn't know anything about quadres and all this. So I do the concentric hierarchy in the ray tracer, and I've been doing this for a couple decades, right? Ever since I started using POV-Ray or POV Ray, this free open source ray tracer, originally I think evolved on the CompuServe community. Now, in the context of doing all that, I am emphasizing also the 2-volume tables that we would want to keep going here. The XYZ volumes table, where a unit edge cube has unit volume, what we all learned since childhood. It's dividing the world into unit cubes. That's what our civilization does in almost every opportunity. But in Synergetics, we look more at the tetrahedron, 4 sides instead of 6, as our basic unit, and we want it to play the role of unit volume, so it has its alternative volumes table. But how do you go back and forth between these two? How would you have like both XYZ and IVM in the same picture frame? And I'm saying there's not just one way to do it, but there is one coherent, intelligent way that Bucky does do it and shares with us and includes in Synergetics, and I keep that going. I stick with his way of doing it. And I think that's important because like there's a school of thought now developed among some latecomers or newcomers, let's call them, into this Bucky Discourse, who want to say that he was kind of losing it by the time Synergetics was published, to the point where he didn't really know what he was talking about with the Synergetics constant. S3, this conversion constant is really, it's not that coherent. We should just kind of let it go away. We should let go of it. But that means we have to kind of retell Bucky's story too. We have to like suggest that he was losing it. He was getting kind of senile a lot earlier than people thought, and there must have been some people who knew then, and then maybe there's a cover up. And then all these people who write about and work on Synergetics, they think they know what S3 means, but they're full of it too, because clearly if it's the product of a addled mind, then anyone who claims to understand it must be full of it or off their rocker, or whatever you want to say. And I'm one of those people, right, who makes sense of S3. I think it works great. So I am pushing back here through my calibration and tabulation to just show that, yeah, you can do this. This would make perfect sense to relate XYZ and IVM systems in this manner as kind of a conversion constant between like Canadian dollars. Let's say tetrahedron dollars are the Canadian dollars and cube dollars are the US dollars. And that's a little bit bigger. We're going to say a cube dollar is about 6% more volume, like more water. You could pour one into the other, and the tetrahedron would not completely fill the cube, and the cube would somewhat overflow the tetrahedron, but not by a whole lot. The second root of 9/8, that's this number. And I was kind of disappointed because Perplexity is like, well, it's not really, Bucky used it, but it's not really that well established as a constant of nature, like Planck's constant and something like this. That was just, Chat GPT type chatterbox. And it's like that reflects then, therefore. I know that that's kind of, insofar as there is writing about it, this is kind of a cross-section summary in a way, given how it's designed to say the most predictable things. That's how these things work. Statistically, stochastically, what a chatbot does is it relies on predictability and saying what's the most likely thing to say about things at a pretty high level, right? High school level at least. So it's a useful tool. And it tells me that the Synergetics constant is still not well understood because it isn't a constant of nature so much as a design decision to start as a home position with the tetrahedron and the cube side by side, roughly the same size, and with a very simple relationship, that the cube's edges are half the length of the tetrahedrons, and yet nevertheless it has a bigger volume a little bit. And we also have a whole tetrabook approach to S3. I have whole videos on S3, so I'm not going to recap the whole thing here. So presuming we're moving ahead on this curriculum, there's always been a gift shop aspect and what goes along with this curriculum. And to some extent, you can just pick it out of the thin air. In other words, once you know what the curriculum is, then you can start to see what the gifts would be, and they can be very commercially available. And it's not like you have to go to any specific website, although that in case of the fuller projection, you might have to. And I still think you want to be trying to get those for yourself because we're doing all this talk about Greenland these days. And, or look it up on the web. It's got Greenland properly sized. Greenland's in the news a lot because there's this sense of everyone's kind of running north because of the climate change and getting so hot, and we're all moving our civilizations at a glacial pace, but nevertheless more northward. And so the colonial aspect of migration, it's kind of like we need to invade, we being the USA, we need to invade Canada and Greenland because that's the future. Let's at least get that ball rolling, I think, is the idea in that kind of manifest destiny spirit. And I'm not pushing all that. I'm not trying to be Mr. Imperialist. We're talking about Greenland here, so let's get it size correct. And let's see it in relation to the rest of the world in a non-distorted manner, which means let's stop indulging ourselves and always using this Mercator projection because we know better by now and we have better projections. By the way, this year, when we started the new year with the Bucky ball dropping in Times Square, what frequency is that again? Hexapent, right? Usually I make a big deal out of it. Here was our opportunity to celebrate America's great futurist, and, because we live in a culture where we take that for granted, sarcasm intended. Of course we don't. The parallel world where I'm coming from, we're not adversaries with Russia. We're not adversaries with China. We don't have the high level of stupidity, the Planet of the Apes kind of levels of stupidity that we do currently enjoy. So I sometimes used to try to highlight that around New Year's, but I don't really do that so much anymore. It's like I've kind of gotten used to that we use the Mercator. But I still have the global grid going in Facebook here, for example, in connection with an even earlier idea of extending the train lines across the Bering Strait, right? This was some idea of being able to take the train from London to New York across Alaska, sort of hyper Trans-Siberian Railroad picture. But I'm just saying I'm content to look at this as more the future of electrical hookups, HVDC, high voltage direct current. That being a topic we take up in, and we're getting to the end of my vid here, Martian Math. Martian Math is a curriculum where we talk about kind of a futuristic math that's already infused with a lot of this alternative volumes, table talk. In other words, the concentric hierarchy is taken for granted by the Martians in this story, which kind of represents this alien civilization because it isn't ours so far. Like as Earthlings, we are very right angle kind of people and really into cubes, as I said. So in Martian Math, we have the science fiction story where the humans, the Earthlings, and the Martians, the ETs, have come together to work on hydropower projects. And it's not an adversarial, it could be, like I don't dictate all what you can do with this, but I'm saying I'm anxious to get on with just how we make electricity, what's the theory behind it, AC versus DC, Edison, Tesla, what is the current state of the grid, and how has it been evolving over the whole story of how President Johnson got to be so popular as a politician, rural electrification, the whole story in this country and everywhere else in the world. That's a lot of what Fuller's critical path is about, is the spread of electrical grids, and how does he see that going forward? And is it going to be all balkanized, or are we going to take advantage of time differences and peak demands matching lower demand in the other hemisphere, stuff like that? That was his rap. And I haven't ever let go of that, notwithstanding all the Planet of the Apes stuff that's going on, right? Because that could be transitory. That's the political data layer, which is worth mocking, I think, right? It's not really taking us anywhere very promising. So, better to work with engineering principles and statistics and synergetics and things we can actually trust and depend on a little bit. Okay, well, that kind of winds up kind of where I'm at the beginning of the year. Defending S3 and Bucky's reputation for sanity is really, I just don't think it's wise to dismiss all of his work the way we have been doing. Marginalizing Bucky's contribution has not ever been a good idea, but it has been undertaken. Witness how many universities give you any background on all that I'm talking about, let alone high schools. But my elitism kicks in, and it's like I can just say the better schools all do this. It's been true for a while, and for a while maybe we haven't had any better schools that you know about. But I'm sorry you were left out in the cold, and maybe you'll join us now and get yourself an education. Don't be like those dinosaurs. Okay, I could rant, but I think this was long enough. Appreciate your attention, and I'll talk to you next time.